My name is John Larg. I was hanged in Perth in 1817, and I regularly come from the cold grave to take tours round Perth and Dunkeld, telling stories of the dark past. But I can be found wherever there's been murder, witchcraft, battles fought, or executions carried out. And today I'm in Crieff at the old toll booth, and I will be telling you some stories from the town's dark past and tales from the wider area. Come with me. We Scots, per head of population, burned more people suspected of witchcraft than any other country in the world. So most villages, towns and cities in Scotland have a witchcraft story, and we in Crieff are no different. Our most famous witch was called Kate McNiven. Kate was a nursemaid for a man called Graham of Inchbreaky, who had a castle to the east of Crieff. Kate looked after Graham's young boy. Shortly after she looked after the child, the boy seemed to be in his bed all the time, with stomach cramps, fevers, headaches. There were mutterings within the staff at the castle that Kate was a witch. She was casting spells on his boy, so when he was ill in his bed, she didn't have to look after him. They told Graham of their concerns, but he didn't believe such nonsense. One day, Graham had some business in Dunning to see to. He travelled to the nearby village of Dunning, conducted his business, then sat down to have a meal with his hosts. At that time, the time of the plague, people would often bring their own eating utensils with them. When Graham sat down to eat, he found his cutlery was gone. It was missing. They hunted high and low, but couldn't find it anywhere. He had to borrow some. Graham was eating his meal when suddenly, out of nowhere, a big bumblebee appeared and started to buzz around his head, round and round and round. It didn't bother anyone else in the room apart from Graham. Eventually, this insect was caught in a beaker and put out the window. When Graham got back to his castle at Crieff, he told his wife this story of the missing cutlery and the bumblebee. You can imagine his surprise when the two of them walked into the dining room and they saw his cutlery on the table. He was sure he had packed it and taken it to Dunning with him, convinced. Again, the couple discussed this story. As they talked, they did not notice a maid in the corner of the room, quietly cleaning some silver. When Graham and his wife left, the maid ran down the stairs to the kitchen. Excitedly, she got all the servants together and told them this story. But the maid's version was slightly different. Instead of a bumblebee buzzing around Graham's head, it was Kate McNiven who'd used her powers as a witch to turn herself into this bee. Now, today we'd find this story incredible, but it was widely believed at the time. The authorities heard of this. They arrested Kate. She was taken, perhaps, to the toll booth here in Crieff, and through sleep deprivation or mild torture, she confessed to being a witch. She was sentenced to death. She was taken to the north of the Knock Hill, just outside Crieff. She was put in a barrel and it was rolled down the steep slope. Where the barrel came to a standstill, it was put right. Kate stood in this barrel, was tied to a stake that was driven into the ground. Some firewood were placed around her legs and feet. A big crowd had gathered, mostly from Moni. The minister read the scriptures. He then stopped, looked at Kate and told her he could help if she would confess again to witchcraft in front of this audience. Kate, terrified, sobbing, looked at the minister, thinking it was her only chance of survival. She confessed a second time. The minister slammed his Bible shut and said he would help by having her soul cleansed by the flames. The fire was lit. The smoke curled into the grey sky. Kate pleaded for help, mercy. One person in the crowd felt sorry for Kate. This was Graham of Inchbrakie. He climbed on top of a nearby standing stone and addressed the crowd. He pleaded Kate's case, asked for mercy, asked that they let her go. But this fell on deaf ears, for they had all come to see Kate burn, and burn she would. Realising all was lost, just before the flames took properly onto the fire, as he crept towards her legs, Kate shouted Graham over. He jumped down from the stone and walked towards the flames. Kate, in a low voice, confessed to being a witch. Then she bit a bead from her blue necklace and spat it at Graham's feet. She told Graham that as long as his family keep this blue stone, their line will forever flourish and prosper, but not to lose it. The Grahams of Inchbrakie kept the stone for generations. Then it was lost. They also lost their castle and their lands. This next story had its origins in Crieff, when a few members of the McNab clan came here to the market to get some goods for Christmas. When they had bought their goods, they headed back to their lands, to the west of Loch Tay. On the journey, they were ambushed by their mortal enemies, the McNeeshes. The McNeeshes were larger in number. After a token resistance, the McNab clansmen had to flee, leaving all their produce, which was gathered up by the McNeeshes and taken back to their lands, which was to the east of Loch Earn. The McNab clansmen went back to their lands and told their chief, Finlay McNab, what had happened. He was furious that his Christmas would now be spoiled. A wee while later, Finlay's second wife, Catherine Campbell, went to visit Finlay's eldest son, one of her two stepsons. Catherine said to Smooth John McNab, the son, while talking about this McNeish ambush, she said, "Tonight is the night, if the lads were the lads." This was a coded message, stating that if Smooth John McNab were man enough, he would avenge this attack. He took the bait. He went to see his brother, and the two of them arranged to go to Loch Tay. But Catherine had hoped that by sending Smooth John McNab and his brother on this suicide mission, the two of them would be killed, and her eldest son would become heir to the clan of McNab. But there was a problem. Catherine's 10 sons got on very well with Smooth John McNab and his son. They respected him, and they also wanted to come on this raid. The 12 men prepared. Meanwhile, the McNeeshes were heading to their lands when, directly in front from the shadows,
"Beware, beware of a time when there are two boats on Loch Earn."
the McNeeshes looked at each other uncomfortably. Then they remembered that they owned the only boat on the loch. They laughed. After leaving some food and drink for this witch as a mark of respect, the clansmen went to their castle, which stood on a small island on the east end of the loch, safe in the knowledge that they were untouchable in this fortress. Meanwhile, the McNabs had set off, knowing fine well that there was a shortage of boats on Loch Earn. The McNabs had decided to take their own. They struggled through the mountain passes that were full of snow, dragging and carrying this boat. It would be energy sapping. Finally, they came down from the hills to the shore of Loch Earn. The McNabs hid. They could see the castle on the island. It was lit up, and there were sounds of merriment, drinking, laughter and music. The McNabs waited for hours, and then slowly the lights were put off, the dancing and music and laughter diminished, and all went quiet. Then the McNabs pushed their boat into the loch and silently rowed across to the island. The McNisses, they had failed to put any sentries out to keep watch, safe on their island. The McNabs got over the curtain wall, then ran to the main hall. The door was locked. Smooth John banged on the door. You could hear murmuring from inside. Then a confused, drunken and tired voice asked who it was. Smooth John said, "Who would you least like it to be?" After a pause, the reply, Smooth John McNab, came. At that, the McNabs burst into the room. The McNeeshes were mostly unarmed, still half drunk and half asleep. The McNabs slaughtered them. All the McNeeshes were killed, apart from a small boy and girl who managed to hide. When the killing was done, Smooth John told his men to cut off the heads of the dead and put them into a sack. The McNabs then went back to their lands. When Smooth John was back in his father's castle, he made his way to the room of Catherine Campbell. He tipped out the sack so the heads rolled around her feet and said to her, "There's bowls for your bairns," meaning that he understood that she had tried to set him up to be killed so that her eldest son would become the chief of the McNabs. Strathearn doesn't only have its famous witch and Kate McNiven, it also has a member of the royal family. Helen Gloag lived just south of the village of Mewthal. Her father was the local blacksmith. She lived with her siblings and her father. They had no mother because Helen's mother had died when she was a small girl. The father met another woman and they got married, and the relationship between Helen and her stepmother was strained from the very, very beginning. Perhaps she resented this woman coming and joining the family when she, as the oldest daughter, had been doing a good job up until then. Helen, as she got older, met a wealthy farmer who was quite a bit more mature in years than Helen was. The stepmother put an end to this relationship, and that really did damage the relationship between Helen and her stepmother. Helen had been saving up for years. Anytime she earned some money, she'd put a little bit aside, for she was wanting to start a new life in America. She told her father of her plans. Her father would be broken-hearted, but when Helen had enough cash saved up, her father took her to Greenock, where she got a ship. The ship set sail. The first few days were uneventful, and then a sailor on the Crow's Nest came down and told the captain that a ship on the horizon seemed to be following them. The captain was apprehensive. At that time there were many pirates on the high seas. Sure enough, this boat was following. It was smaller and sleeker and faster than Helen's ship, and it soon caught up with them. And this ship was a pirate ship. The pirates were from Morocco. Helen's boat was boarded. All the crew and passengers were locked down in the hold, and the ship sailed for one of the Moroccan ports. Helen and the rest of the passengers were taken to the marketplace in this port city and sold as slaves. A wealthy merchant bought Helen to give to the Sultan. The Sultan put Helen in his harem. Over the years, Helen, who by all accounts was very beautiful and extremely intelligent, caught the Sultan's eye. She moved up the pecking order and soon became wife number one, the Empress of Morocco herself. She used her influence on the Sultan. She persuaded him to end slavery. She organised a trade deal with Britain. Her brother came to visit. He was a captain on a Royal Navy warship and came to see Helen. Helen gave the Sultan 2 boys, an heir to his throne. Life was good for Helen Gloag. She would send money home to her family in Strathearn. But then the Sultan died. The first thing the new Sultan did was he murdered Helen's 2 boys. Helen had to flee the palace. She ran and fled to a nunnery where she hid out for the rest of her life. But we in Strathearn are very, very proud of Helen Glögg, the Empress of Morocco.